And it was automatically assumed that he was wrong. Automatically assumed that he was wrong. The family wasn't trying to learn. The family wasn't trying to grow and hear that perspective. It was like, hey, you should feel fortunate to have married into this family. And if you'll listen to us, we'll show you how to be, we'll show you how to be like us.
What is up, guys? RLTKPHX Real Talk Phoenix Podcast, episode 10.
Episode 10.
We made it into the double digits.
We did.
Finally, right?
My son would say that makes us a preteen. Because you go from
one number podcast. To two. We're preteen podcast.
Yeah. I think he created a new thing.
We're moving into the teenage years.
Yep.
All right. So excited to be with you guys today again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Following, dropping comments, dropping likes, paying attention and engaging with the stuff that we're doing on social. We're super appreciative of you guys that are doing that. And so, today we wanted to dive into an issue that I think is near and dear to both mine and John's heart as we've worked together for how many years now? 10, 11 years?
Yeah, it's been a long time.
It was 10 years, yeah. Worked together for 10 years and just had a really close relationship. Our families are super close. His kids call me uncle. My kids call him uncle. You know what I'm saying? Our families actually, we live together. And so, we wanted to dive into the issue of racism. And so to kind of start off, I guess, because there's different ideas about how this thing, racism, works, right? And we have different ideas in terms of how we would define it. But just to kind of, I guess, clarify the perspective that we're coming from as we kind of have this conversation. And we kind of link it into Gen Z and why parents or influencers of teenagers, and Gen Zers in particular, should be even thinking about this issue and processing the way that they're responding to it. And so prejudice traditionally has been, thoughts or feelings towards a particular group that are degrading, right? And then racism has been the action of, like, actually acting out or against a particular group of people.
Like through specific actions.
Yeah, right? So like calling names, physical violence, and then obviously we have systemic racism, which is, systems and structures that were put in place. And traditionally we know this is true, right? Redlining after the Second World War, keeping people of color in the inner city and then not allowing them to move out based on loaning money and those different types of things, all those things that happened after World War II. We have the war on drugs, we have the war on crime, and how that affected those populations. And we see that play itself out, right? In our city, we see the way schools receive funding through property taxes, right? Those different types of things. So if your properties are more expensive in one part of town than the other, then hey, that part of town is gonna have more money, and I get it. But the reason why that exists is because there were fundamentally decisions that were made in the past that were actually predicated on what the color of someone's skin was. Wow. And so we may not necessarily be like now, in 2019 saying, hey, well, forget this group of people. I hate blacks, or I hate Mexicans, or I hate whites, or whatever. But because of the decisions that were made previously, right, they've affected how we're living today.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it's like those decisions were intentionally made to design things a particular way. And I think if we're smart, we would also say that we have to intentionally make decisions to reverse that, right? We can't just say, oh, well, we're done with that now. We don't need to talk about it. It doesn't matter. I'm an individual. I'm not, a person who's affected by the decisions that were made previously, or I'm not going to be held to that standard, right? I've heard that said quite a bit.
Right.
And so the reality is, like I was saying to you a minute ago, if somebody receives an inheritance, they received it because somebody before them made a bunch of decisions, right, that acquired wealth and now allows them to make a whole different subset of decisions with the wealth that they've been given.
Right.
So like our lives are always influenced by the people that came before us.
Right.
And for us to say that they weren't.
For better or worse.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so depending on how the person before me lived is going to affect the subset of decisions I actually have to choose from in life. Right. And so people start life at different places, and there's a reason why things are that way. And so anyways.
I think that, though, most people who feel that they're not racist and maybe have benefited from a system that is racist feel a little bit confused, like, what can I really do to make a difference?
Yeah.
other than just not be racist myself.
For sure.
But if the system needs to be changed, that can become pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's in America, it's defined party politics, right?
Mm.
Like, so you have to vote for one party over another. And then if you think racism is an issue, but not like as important as, say, abortion or some other issue that seems to be real hot button, then making progress can take longer because they attach the ideas and you have to get in this weird standoff on like, okay, do I vote for this party or that party because this part I agree with, but this part not so much. So you get in this calculus you have to
I think that's part of the problem, right? Because the reality is we have things in our society that drive us. We have ideas and worldviews, right, that kind of drive the decision-making process. And so we're always thinking about things a particular way.
Right.
And so the intent of what we're doing today is not to do that, but to really start to create self-awareness.
Right.
This reality where we can begin to listen to each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Begin to take information in and recognize where our blind spots are and allow that to kind of stir us into making a decision, right?
Yeah.
So like, for example, usually when, and this is from a guy, he's out in Chicago, he's a pastor out in Chicago, and he writes on race stuff a lot, obviously because he's a white guy, but he pastors a church in the inner city, and so he deals with this issue a lot. And he said when white people talk about race, they're talking about the individual. When black people talk about race, they're talking about the power structure.
What do you mean?
So like, for example, if I was to say to somebody, hey, I feel like this is racist, or what do you think about racism? A lot of times, if I'm talking to a white person, they would assume that I'm talking about them.
Right.
Because they think about things in an individualistic way.
Wow.
And so it's like, hey.
Well, hey, I'm not racist.
Exactly, right? That's usually the response because it's like, it's because they interpret the world in that individualistic way.
Wow.
But usually when black people are talking, right, and if you look at how we live, we tend to live a little bit more communally.
What do you think the reasons for that?
In terms of living communally?
Yeah, what are the reasons for that? Because I have noticed that among some of my friends of color. It seems to be there's more of a communal vibe.
Wealth. I think it comes down to the economy, which obviously I think is kind of what this whole thing is built on, right?
So if historically people of color have been historically more poor, they've had to come
band together. Yeah.
Wow.
And if you have more money, you don't need to, right? And so, like, the reality is I can live a more individualistic lifestyle. And then also when I have wealth, what do I want to do? I want to protect it, right? And so if I'm going to protect it, I'm going to keep as many people away as possible, right? And so we keep people away, right? That's why in more well-to-do neighborhoods, you have houses that are designed in such a way where you drive into your garage and you never even meet your neighbor.
Right.
Right? You have your little gate that goes into your house and you do your thing.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? You can go years without talking to somebody on your block.
I've noticed this before with people. I felt like, man, I need help with something, but maybe this person isn't building a relationship with me because then they'd feel obligated now that they knew that I had an issue.
Yeah.
Because then helping me would mean that they'd have to lose money. You know, and I definitely have felt that before with people who have means. It's like, are you kind of like stiff-arming me right now because you have an issue with me or because you're just greedy and you don't want to come up off all your money? You know, like I've felt that from people before.
Right? I think the reality is what we have to recognize is like there are frameworks that that define how we think about things. I think one of them is money.
Right.
Right? And so how we think about stuff is defined by money. How much is it going to cost me to actually do this thing or not do this thing? And then we attach the value of whether we should do that thing based upon how much it costs or it doesn't cost, right? Yeah. Individualism, it mocks our thinking. And so when we think about things, we always think about things in terms of ourselves. And we're not necessarily thinking about the ramifications of the decisions we make on the people around us, right? We're thinking about how it makes us feel and what we want to do.
Got to look out for number one.
And then it also allows us to dismiss macro issues like racism.
Right.
Because, well, I'm not racist or I don't have anything to do with it. Or like I haven't done anything, or I have black friends, or I have Latino friends, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it allows us to do that. And so those are two major things that I would say that have affected the way that we look at this issue.
Power and money?
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, the reality is when we look at the history of racism, even if we were to look at it in terms of America, what we have to understand fundamentally is like, it wasn't like it wasn't like people necessarily just said, all right, we're just going to hate this group of people just to hate them. I think there was fear and those different types of things that were involved in that, right? But what we see is that at some point, the color of your skin began to define your personality traits, right?
Right.
And so think about it this way. At what point did you become white? You know what I'm saying? Like, when did you transition from your heritage, right? Your last name's Eisenring.
Yes.
You know, we're always having fun with that. Eisenring, right?
Right.
And so it's German, right?
Sure.
That's where your family heritage is German.
Right.
So at what point did you transition from being German to being white? My family heritage is Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
I'm of Caribbean descent. And so at what point did I transition from being Caribbean or Caribbean, however you want to say it, to being black? And like, and why were those two labels given, and what do those labels mean?
Right.
Right. And so what we see historically is that those labels were given to define one group of people as superior, and one group of people as inferior, right? And the whole reason was, hey, we want to build an economy. So how do we build it?
You're talking about here in America?
Yeah. So how do we build it? We need labor in order to do it.
Right.
Right? Because remember, at that time, too, there was a whole bunch of child labor stuff going on as well, right?
Yeah,
it wasn't necessarily just... Yeah. And we started to create laws against that stuff eventually.
Yeah, I think it was like sometime in the early 1900s, but you're right. That's a really good point.
Saying? So what it was about wasn't...
So whether you're black or a child or a woman or whatever, we're going to exploit you.
It was about
the point
making
is
money.
Yeah.
And we had to find a way to justify being greedy. So what did we say? This group of people is not human.
Right. I mean, you have to make that conclusion before you can purchase someone.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
And so we propagate this whole idea, this whole ideology, and then it seeps into our religion, it seeps into our policies, it seeps into our business structures, right? It seeps into everything. Right. Yeah. And so we had to create
So that's the dehumanizing part. Because now they're a commodity. They're not a living, breathing soul.
3/5 human, right?
Right.
And so now we've justified using this group of people to prop up the thing that we really want. You know what I'm saying? What we wanted was to build.
And you're referring to the genesis of the concept of racism. And I've heard you speak to this before, that racism really is a peculiar concept to the American experience. That it's not really something that you see for the most part.
Well, I think it's a Western. I think in the way
Can you
that
explain
in the way that it is now, right? The way that we see it play itself out in society, I think is definitely more of a Western thing, right? Because of the individualism, right? We see in other cultures,
but the
cultures
historical
are more cyclical and communal, right? Here we're very individualistic. It's about self, achieving the things that you want to achieve, however you need to achieve them. And so because of that, we have some very specific things that drive our ways of thinking, right? Like individualism being one, money being another one, and obviously money being synonymous with power, right? Wealth. And so I think that's fundamentally because we've said those are the ultimate things. Right. We've been willing to do certain things to obtain the ultimate, right? Which is, hey, if I'm going to accrue wealth, I'm going to do whatever I need to do. So I'm going to get it. Yeah, I'm going to crawl over whoever I have to crawl over, and I'm going to justify whatever I need to justify to get the ultimate thing, and that is wealth, power, right? And the ability to control my own destiny, individualism.
So if I understand what you're saying a little bit about racism in the West, was that part of how we see racism today? And you were talking about earlier that people don't necessarily refer to their nationalities. Obviously, there's all types of Yeah. There's all types of quote white people who look white, and all sorts of black people and people all in between, right?
Yeah.
But now we're defining people based on something like the color of their skin,
and we're attaching personality traits with that, right?
And you're attaching. If I'm understanding you right, you're saying that where racism basically started was the slave trade, because it was easier to identify people as in or out, slave or free.
Well, what we see is when all that stuff's happening, right? Because you got to remember there was Irish people that came over and they were called the N-word, just like
but that's a nationality issue, right?
Yeah, right. But so at first it was more about nationality, ethnicity, all those different types of things. But we saw this transition from that, right,
to be poor people,
white and black.
Gotcha.
You see what I'm saying? And I think one of the first times we saw that was in the East Coast. One of the first recorded incidences of somebody being treated differently because of the color of their skin. There was a black slave that ran away. I think it was a Dutch slave that ran away, and an Irish slave that ran away. So Dutch and Irish, both white, right, or would appear to be white.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously the African, black. And so what we saw in that community was, and I think this is one of the first recorded instances, I can't remember the name of the black slave that this happened to, but what basically happened was in that community, the Dutch and the Irish guy basically got to serve the community for a certain period of time, and then they would go free.
Mm-hmm.
But this was the first time we saw a black or African slave basically be sentenced to a lifetime of servitude to the community.
Wow.
And he had done the same thing that the Irish and the Dutch slave had done, but he got a more heavier
stiffer
sentence.
penalty. Yeah.
And so this is one of the first recorded instances in American history where we saw.
So that would be an effect of racism, a stiffer penalty on blacks, basically, for the same crimes.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that because it reminds me, I've had all sorts of experiences with things growing up, but one of the things from my past was I had to go to alternative school.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get on too well in regular school for normal folks. I was a bit of a savage when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
And so I found myself in alternative school, which basically was a school for girls who were pregnant and kids who had trouble in normal school. And there were several people of color in that school. And one of the things that I did notice quite a bit was, I was a bit of a troublemaker.
Yeah.
But all of us, you can't go to alternative school without being a troublemaker.
Yeah, hence alternative.
And I would notice that.
It's a nice word.
Like, for instance, one time I almost caught a class where it was like a home ec class that they had, and I almost caught the whole room on fire. And one of the teachers who got on to me was laughing about it when she got on to me.
Yeah.
And then, it was one of those things where I could just feel like, oh, you knucklehead, you should knock that off. But when it would be some of my other friends around who aren't white, I would notice that they'd get suspended a lot more, they'd get kicked out. And it's like I was always getting a second chance, so to speak.
Yeah.
And to be honest, think about this. We're at an alternative school that's like 90% people of color, and I was like the minority there.
Yeah.
All of the people who were in charge were white.
Dang.
There were maybe one or two, and I think back to it, I think there was, I can't remember every teacher. I think there was like one or two teachers there that were people of color. And of course, this is in the South, which is, pretty routine for that kind of stuff. But yeah, man, that's a profound point.
Yeah, I think so.
So one of the consequences of racism that we would see, you'd say, would be a stiffer penalty for people for the same crimes, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And I think,
wow.
Yeah, even it plays itself out in the justice system, right? Like a black person is 6 times more likely to be convicted for the same crime.
Wow.
And so there's data that just bears out the reality of how this is playing out in our society. Mm-hmm. And I would say, have things got better since slavery and civil rights? Sure. But I think what we have to look at is how does racism play itself out in our society today? Like, I think it's a misnomer for us to judge. We use the same standard that we used 50 years ago. Society has changed.
Good,
we're using different standards for everything else.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying? We're using different standards for interpreting the world than we did 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. We have an iPhone now. We didn't have that 50 years ago. So
that's true.
So how do we redefine what's happening in our society based on what's happening in our society now? As opposed to using archaic standards and saying, well, by archaic standards, we don't have, blacks can't use this toilet and different things like that anymore, right? So racism can't. I don't think that's the case. And I think it's like, like what civil rights was how many years ago?
Oh gosh.
50?
50s, 60s?
Yeah. So 60 years ago? 70 years ago?
Yeah.
Is it?
Quite a while ago, yeah.
But like, there's one generation, really. Like, there's people who are still alive when that happened. And so we're not as far removed from it as we like to say we are.
Yeah, there's people still around. Mm-hmm.
And it's been interesting for me too, obviously, because I'm from another country, right? And so diving into American culture and seeing how things work here and how different it is from being an Englishman, and obviously there's racism there.
And you've noticed that?
Yeah, like, if I'm honest, I feel like racism's worse in England than it is in America.
Really?
But that's a different conversation in itself. I actually have hope for America.
That's good.
Which is interesting because people are talking about it, fighting about it.
Yeah,
those
man.
different types of things.
And I think that's encouraging to hear you say, because I think when I speak to a lot of my friends, you know, they're white, they feel like, man, I'm not racist. I want to help change things if things need to be changed, but they have a real hard time seeing, like,
yeah,
you know, is this just emotional stuff that you're feeling, and like,
and
if you just get your stuff together,
yeah. And
I remember Chris Rock used to
there
have
is
this
truth to that. Like, there is this emotional experience that people have, but once again, I think that's one of the problems with Western culture. We assume that knowledge has to be empirical.
What do you mean?
Like, it has to be some sort of equation, 2 + 2 = 4.
Mm.
Like, there's a type of knowledge that I gain from sitting in a room with you and feeling what you feel.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? That's a type of knowledge too. It's emotional, it's experiential, but it's knowledge all the same. It's me knowing something.
That's good.
Right? And so we
like
just,
an intimate knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. But all we've done is just said that this knowledge is more important than every other knowledge. And then when it suits us, we use that knowledge to write everything else off. You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
And so it's like, but at some point, like, that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And nobody does that all the time, because, like, you have relationships with people that you love, and if they do something you don't like, then you're going to tell them. What are you going to do then? You're going to appeal to empirical evidence just to write it off? You know, your kid's upset because your teenager's upset because they don't feel like you spend enough time with them, and you're like, well, I spent 5 hours and 57 seconds with you this week, and so
you're wrong.
That's 10% of my week, and so
right.
You're wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
You're going to try and understand where they're
why
coming
they
from,
feel that way.
Feel what they're feeling, and
that's
why.
Good,
and
man.
Understand where they're coming from, and gain perspective.
That's really good.
And you're going to take that in, internalize it,
and then change if you need to.
Exactly.
And
but you're going to work through it together.
That's a good point.
Because I do feel like being dismissive.
Mm-hmm. And I do feel that's where a lot of whites are. They get offended at the notion that they would be considered racist, right? They don't want to hear sometimes. And I'm not saying all. I mean, there's a lot of great. I know the majority of the white people that I know feel like, man, if this is a thing, let's fix it. But they're genuinely confused because they're like, how can
I think that in itself, to be confused about something means that either somebody's not doing a good job of explaining themselves, or you're not doing a good job of listening.
Maybe.
Right? So, like, if you're confused, you got to get clarity. But the only way you can get clarity is to listen, because obviously you're not the expert on the issue, right?
But for whites, when you're told that you need to listen, like, if you think you're fine and then someone tells you you're not, you're instantly in a defensive posture.
For sure, yeah.
You get what
sense.
I'm saying?
Yeah, makes 110%, yeah.
So really, it is like there needs to be a re-education of me.
But think about
so
it. Like, what makes it easy for me and you to sit and talk about this?
We have a relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then when we look at our society, we see that, generally speaking, a whole group of people lives in one part of town and a whole group of people lives in another part of town. And so if that's the case, how are you really going to have relationships with those groups of people? And then the interesting thing is, like, okay, so usually if you go to an affluent part of town, right? Usually it's majority white.
Mm-hmm.
The black people or the people of color that live in that part of town have had to conform to that part of town, right? And the standards by which it lives.
Dang.
And so it's not necessarily like they're bringing everything that they are to that part of town, per se, and that's being invited. It's assumed that if you're going to live in that part of town,
you're going to
conform to the standards of that part of town. So you're really not even figuring out what you're missing out on. You're just assuming, like, hey, if you're going to be over here, you're going to do our thing. You know what I'm saying? You're going to do it the way that we do it. And if you're not, you need to get the hell out. You know what I'm saying?
That's fair.
That's just the way that it works.
Yeah.
Instead of us coming to the table and say, what do you both have to offer? What do you both have to bring to the table?
True,
How can we learn from each other, right? And that in itself is a level of superiority. I'm assuming that what I do is better than what you do, and that's why you should conform to what I do.
That's
because
true.
It's better.
That's true, man. I remember when I first moved from one part of town to the other, which one was definitely the area of town that I live in now is definitely more diverse. I'll just put it that way. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've noticed about it is just the neighborhood is louder. Not loud in a like chaotic, dangerous kind of way, but just a loud in general. Like there's more kids playing in the street. There's more neighbors playing their music. More parties. to be honest, people having a good time.
Hanging out with each other.
Yeah.
I know my neighbors.
It just seems like more life, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And so I go on to other, when I think to other parts of town, you're right, that conformity of culture is a different thing. And I think that I never thought about that. Like for people, on one side of the track, so to speak, when they come into whatever affluent neighborhoods, they're the ones conforming.
Yeah.
They're not bringing everything of what they are to those neighborhoods. That's a really great point.
And I think just to kind of...
So you're saying people of color feel that burden. Like, I can't be myself.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do.
And that's what I would say is different. You asked a second ago about our relationship.
Yeah.
We don't just have a relationship.
Yeah,
we have a real relationship.
Yeah, I don't feel like I have to be anything but myself around you.
Right.
At all.
Right.
But I feel like, there's spaces I'm in all the time where I feel like I have to dial back my personality when I'm a 6'3" black guy with a beard. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I walk through a parking lot and I watch, women lock their doors because they're intimidated by me.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Like, what do you think that makes me feel like?
Yeah.
I'm just a thug or a brute. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I watch, I constantly walk around stores and neighborhoods and different things of that nature, trying to be overly polite to prove to people like, hey, I'm not who you think I am. Yeah, I'm safe. Smiling at women in the store because I see the way they see me and they're like, oh, snap, what's this dude? You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
And so I live with that. You know what I'm saying? And that's something I experience on a day to day. Yeah,
I remember one of the things you had told me was being black and British when you came to America, you were able to see the racism more clearly.
Because for me, it's like, okay, people assume something about me until I open my mouth.
Right.
And because I'm English, they immediately assume intelligence. So it's like, oh, okay, cool. And then one of the things I've commonly heard is, oh, you're not black, you're British. And I'm like,
wow.
What does that mean? You know what I'm saying? And I know that obviously with, I've explained that black and white is somewhat of a racialized term even in itself.
Mm.
But the reality that, what is somebody saying when they say that? Or you're not like those other black people. You know what I'm saying? Who are like loud and ignorant and, you know what I'm saying?
Wow. That's how you're taking it when they say that?
Or you think that's pretty much what else could you be saying?
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
that's true.
When you deduce it to its logical conclusion, is there much else that you really could be saying? You know what I mean? What makes me less black and them more black?
Mm. Man, that's good.
Because I'm probably one of the darkest cats you know. You know what I'm saying?
That's true.
And so, so yeah, it's interesting. And just to wrap this part up, I was having a conversation with somebody a couple of years ago. We were talking about this issue of racism and why people live, as we say, on other sides of the tracks.
Right.
And what do we do about it? And so as we kind of walk through this issue, we were talking about the education system and reforming certain things. And his response was, well, we've tried that already and it hasn't worked. And so in regards to helping people of color. And so I was like, okay, so at the end of the day, if that's your conclusion, then what you're ultimately saying is like, white people have made better choices than black people. Mm-hmm. And that's why they've ended up in the situation that they're in, right? We make better choices. We make better decisions. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're in the place that we're in. Mm-hmm. And
but that goes back to the point you were making earlier.
Exactly.
If you started out with
a whole different set of choices than I did, you know what I'm saying? Then like, we're not even in the same ballpark. You know what I'm saying? I'm in A league and you're in the major leagues.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I'm not even in AAA ball. I'm in single A. You know what I'm saying? And you're in the major leagues. Mm. You're making those kind of decisions.
So you can't really even compare.
Yeah, exactly.
The stats.
It's apples and oranges. You get what I'm saying? I have a whole different set of decisions to make.
Did you make that point to the person when you were talking?
And they didn't have anything to say when I said that. Mm-hmm. Right? It's just like, no, I'm not racist. Once again, right? But like not understanding that the implications of what you're saying.
So just to back up, you're saying that when you were talking to them about racism and the things that you're seeing, the poverty, the child rate, like the parents being born or parents having children out of wedlock, all of those things, right? Single mothers, whatever those maladies may be that are affecting the black community.
Yeah, and
they were saying like, the reason that those things happen
is because they just made bad choices, and that's it. And I'm like, well, yeah, people are making bad choices, but the question is why, right? Why are people making bad choices? Mm-hmm. Now, if we're just fundamentally going to say this group of people made bad choices and this group of people, then yeah, this group of people is bad than this group of people.
Yeah, because they made better choices.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Period. You're just better.
Right.
But like, do we believe that?
Yeah, and
that is racism.
And when people from privilege,
case in point,
when people from privilege make bad choices, they tend to have a support group around them that
fix
helps.
it.
Right.
Right.
And when you make bad choices in the other scenario, you're all of a sudden plunged into poverty.
Yep.
You know.
Exactly.
Wow.
Like in impoverished communities, if people get divorced, usually they end up in poverty. Like when my mom and dad separated, it like
devastated your home.
Yeah, it wasn't people to have like we went from being middle class to being poor.
Right.
Just like that.
Overnight.
Because we lost an income.
Because someone made a bad decision.
In other spaces.
So it just must be that people of color make worse decisions.
Yeah, I guess.
Wow.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, because white people have made those same decisions and it didn't plunge them into poverty.
Yeah, and then we have to look at, so how historically did this group of people acquire wealth, right? Homestead Act, all those different types of things throughout history. Redlining after the Second World War, how the banks were giving out loans and all those different types of things. How did this group of people accrue what they have, and how did this group of people not accrue anything?
Right.
It's interesting.
Very interesting.
So, why does this matter to Gen Z? I think for a number of reasons. Number one, we're seeing more interracial relationships, right?
Absolutely.
And I mean, with Gen Z, to be fair, there's probably quite a few biracial children being born. Like my wife's white, right? And so, I have 2 children, so they're biracial.
I have seen a lot more interracial relationships.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that
will continue, right?
I do. And that was the point you were saying earlier. Like the only way that real change can happen is if people don't understand, okay, I just need more data and make decisions off of data. You have to have those relationships. And so,
because life is more than just data, right? Like data matters, but it matters because like even the data is predicated on people relating to each other. You know what I'm saying? And so, the relationships that we have, how we interact with each other, who we interact with, all that stuff is informing who we are and what we believe. And what we believe about people that we don't know, what we believe about people that we do know, right? It informs our world. And so if we're going to be well-rounded people who understand the world and how it works, and that like there are different people with different experiences, and that, their experiences may be different than mine, but to determine whether their experience is good and bad, like black and white, is like an oversimplification of existence. Like, living is complicated. There are plenty of things that we all do that are good and bad day to day. You know what I'm saying? We all experience joy. We all experience sorrow. And like those things are weaved in and out of our lives. You know what I'm saying? And so there are beautiful things about poor communities and not so beautiful things. And there are beautiful things about rich communities and not so beautiful, right?
Right.
But the sad thing is when those communities never interact, they fundamentally miss out on life. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like understanding a whole different way to live and what the beauty is in that, and another different way to live and what the beauty is in that. Yeah. And once again,
I think, go ahead.
Once again, we've already, even in the way that we're communicating, tied up the categories in money, rich and poor. You know what I'm saying? Wealthy and not wealthy. But like, is that the only way to define a group of people? And is that the only standard that we should have by which we judge the types of relationships we get into, or white and black, or, you know what I'm saying? Right. Or white person of color or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And so like, if we start to remove some of those categories intentionally and start to intentionally build relationships with people that are different from us, don't act like us, don't talk like us, don't think like us, I think life can get way more beautiful. And I think Gen Z is doing that a lot.
Online.
Right? Yep. Through social.
And that's what's happening, what I've seen with a lot of young people. They're learning about this stuff because kids are like sitting in front of a camera and saying, here's what racism is, and they're learning about it from each other.
They're learning about the things that are happening in other countries, right? All the oppressive things that are happening in different parts of the world, and the oppressive things that are happening in different parts of our country. And they're not just like, it's not like they just see it. They can literally like look somebody up on social and go interact with somebody who lives in that area.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
For sure. And I mean,
or join a Facebook group or an Instagram group or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And so there's all these different types of ways that they can interact with these people and learn more and grow and understand, right? And all the content that they can consume.
One of the things that I think back through on all of this is because I have thought like, man, it does seem like the younger generation carries this issue of, what do you want to call it, racial reconciliation, or
Mm-hmm.
what I might call racial understanding. They've really taken it to another level. And I think when I think back to where that shifted, I feel like it was with the Trayvon Martin shooting. And the reason I say that is that seemed to be around the time when social media platforms were really at their like early stage. And it just pumped a narrative out there. I remember one time, I think President Obama had said something to the effect of, the reason that the Trayvon Martin case was so powerful to him was because he looked like a kid that could have been his son.
Yeah, I remember that.
Remember?
Yeah.
And I remember that affecting and impacting people. I remember people saying, well, you shouldn't be walking around with a hoodie on like that. And I'm like, whoa, really? Like, what do people have to walk around dressed like to avoid getting killed in a neighborhood with a can of tea and a bag of Skittles, you know? And basically, you know, the story was that this dude essentially stalked him through the neighborhood. And the kid, a teenage kid afraid of a grown man stalking him, got killed. And that stuff hit social media. And I remember, you know, thinking, you know, how much is this thing going to blow up? And it felt like it didn't blow over like normal things, that it kept on going. I mean, I still can remember about Trayvon Martin to this day because it was like a turning point. But what else I've noticed is with young people, they've seen things like Trayvon Martin happen over and over and over again. And where we finding the Philando Castile, like all of these different tragedies that have happened have not just happened, they've been played out on social media.
Yeah, for sure.
And you've got a whole group of kids who spend all their time on their phones watching
Scrolling,
video
watching
after
stuff,
video
reading
after.
the
What are they doing? They're not just wasting time. They're learning about the world,
Mm-hmm.
and they're interacting with people. They're building relationships. They're getting a different perspective. And what I've noticed about Gen Z that's different, like other generations would say, hey, let me hear about your plight and let me, you know, give you the benefit of the doubt concerning your point of view. But here's my point of view, and I'm going to keep mine. So you keep yours, and I'll keep mine, and we'll stay, you know, in our camps. Whereas Gen Z is like, I see your perspective. Here's my perspective. Let's learn about each other.
And let's do something about it.
And let's change it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're interacting, and they haven't just been getting data. They've been building relationships through social.
Yep.
And when you build those relationships, you want something to change. And when you're looking at your parents and you know what's happening in the real world, social media, right? You're getting your information, you're watching this stuff happen, and then you listen to your parents say something that is completely wrong. You instantly lose credibility as a parent.
Yep.
Because your kids go, wow, my parents just don't know what's really happening in the world.
Yep.
And then they think, like, what else is this connected to?
Yep.
You know?
And I think just to kind of give parents a tidbit here that I think is really important. This is because the distribution, the way by which we trust information in society has changed, right? Before it was pipeline. So you trusted the information that the authority figure gave you.
Right.
Now we trust something because 100,000 people shared it.
Yeah.
Right? Because 100,000 people affirmed the validity of this thing. Now, obviously, we see that has its problems, right? Because there's fake news and all those different types of things. But on the flip side, it's had its problems when you've had one person.
Right.
Because people have taken advantage of each other.
Control that too.
Sold all different types of lies to get what they want. And so the reality is parents have to understand that the way by which Gen Z validates information is fundamentally different from the way that you do. And they don't take it because you said it. Mm-hmm. Like they want to see like, hey, here's what people are talking about. And here's what's going around on Twitter. And here's the articles. And here's the videos from like professors or from different people that they consider credible. And so what you need to do is engage them in that stuff, in that space. Well, okay, you read this article. Let me read it. Send it to me. Let's talk about it, right? Now you're engaging on the same wavelength that they engage in. Like those are the things that they trust. You're diving into their world and helping them discern and figure out, like, okay, should I really like believe this or not? Or okay, let me hear my parents' perspective, or my parents heard my perspective, and I've heard their perspective, and now once again we can kind of reason together and come to a reasonable conclusion. You know what I'm saying? But like you said, like. If you're just saying stuff, you know, back in my day or whatever else, Like I hear teenagers say this like all the time. Like, yo, I just think my parents are stupid.
Wow,
like,
really?
They be laughing at their parents. Like, yo, my parents don't know nothing.
Okay, boomer.
They don't really know how the world works. John just defended like everybody who heard that. Who's
But that's a thing.
No, it really is.
And that's true, man. I can remember being young and growing up and thinking that, that generation, you just don't challenge.
But it's different, right? It's not just like, hey, my parents are stupid because I'm a teenager. It's literally like, hey, my parents are stupid because like they haven't read all the stuff that I've read and they haven't seen all the stuff in the world.
They literally are
and
stupid.
They have no idea what's going on the other side of the world right now. And I do
that,
because I like just listened to this kid tell me all this stuff. He literally lives there, as I heard like bombs crashing down in the background.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so it's like, why would I listen to you? You have no freaking idea about what's going on right now.
I know.
And I think like when it comes to issues like this one, racism, I think there's this reality that teenagers feel that way. But on the flip side of that, I think they also feel this pressure too to conform to their family. Because we've had conversations with kids in different parts of town, and it's like, yo, I say I believe this because I know that if I don't, my parents will get upset. So there's almost this duality in it, right? I think in certain cases, you have kids who are more brazen and more brash, right? And will just tell their parents like, nah, I just don't believe what you say. I think you're stupid. Or they'll act like that's true. And then I think you have other kids who will just simply just nod their head and say, yes, mom, yes, dad, you're right.
Right.
But they really do not believe a word you're saying. They're just doing it because what they really value is like your love and your encouragement and affection and you being a parent, and they want you to affirm them, and so they'll just pretend. And I think that's part of the reason why like kids leave home and then their parents find out they're a completely different person from the person that they thought they were. Because now they're free and they can actually be who they really are.
For sure.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep, absolutely.
So yeah, a couple of things that we feel like parents need to know or think about when it comes to this issue, and we've kind of hit on this, but I'm going to say it very explicitly.
Yeah.
You will literally lose credibility with your teenager. If you're an influencer, you will literally lose credibility with the teenager you're trying to influence if you're just saying stuff about what's going on, about anything, and in particular as it comes to racism, as that's what we're talking about right now. If you're just saying stuff solely predicated on what you've seen, your experience, remember the distribution of trust has changed. If you're not pulling from data, if you're not pulling from information that's out there in the world, and hey, here's my perspective, hey, here's what I see, read this video, read this blog. And if you're not taking in that information for yourself from both sides, you're going to lose credibility with your teenager. They're going to think what you have to say is like whack.
You can't just say cliche things.
Nope.
And you can't repeat things that, well, this is how we did it. That may be how it was done, and there may be some wisdom to how it was done. But wisdom takes new information and says, hey, okay, how should we change in light of new information?
Yep.
And so that's really, if you want to summarize Gen Z.
And that's what we're always doing, right? Like as a world, we're always changing based on new information.
They're digital natives. They grew up online.
Yeah, that's where they live.
Exactly.
That's reality. That's existence.
And for us, those of us who didn't grow up with technology, we're not digital natives. We're digital immigrants. Right?
Dang, that's good.
Exactly. So the natives know the land more than the immigrants. And so imagine how we feel when we feel like other people are coming into, quote, our country telling us what America is or whatever, right? And it's the same way with them. Like they've lived from the time they were children, they had a phone in their hand. So they know information. They know the world more than we do. And so really now the thing that I've seen, and this goes back to your credibility thing, you can lose credibility, yes, if you don't listen, but at the same time, when you listen, you gain trust.
Yep.
Right? And you may not know as much as your teenager does, but what you do is you're learning stuff, and they'll tell you like, hey, this or that happened. And you'll be like, whoa, that happened? And maybe it's news to you, but then you get an opportunity to have a conversation and say, well, what do you think about that? And let's talk through it.
Yeah.
Because the overwhelming amount of information that they're consuming on a daily basis, it's going to make anyone paranoid.
For sure.
And most of the kids are saying,
right?
We're seeing it, anxious, anxiety, depression, all that stuff. But they want to act. They want to deal with it. And are we going to help them deal with it in the appropriate and right way? That's where the parental wisdom really needs to step in, right?
That's good. And so, losing credibility with your teenager. You got to make sure you're engaging this stuff. You got to make sure that you're operating in the same space that they're operating in.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're really going to struggle to interact and connect with them on these issues, or they're just going to dismiss you and you don't even know it. And it makes me think about another thing that I've heard. Like, I've heard students, like, as we have these conversations at campus, like, man, my parents say racist stuff all the time.
Yeah.
I hear my grandparents say racist stuff all the time. Or I hear this person and that person, this older person in my life, saying racist stuff. And it's like a lot of them don't say anything. I've noticed that. They're just like, I'm like, so what do you do about it? It's just kind of like, well, they're my parents, or well, they're my aunt or my uncle. And so, like, they're older than me, and so I just kind of dismiss them, right?
Right.
And that's the reality. You're not just losing credibility in this area, but you're losing credibility in all areas.
Right.
So, like, they're way less likely to actually take what you say to the bank and actually, like, trust it in terms of something that they should actually apply to their lives. Because they're like, man, if you're this way in this area, how is that affecting everything else?
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
And so, something to really consider. And so, I think another thing to consider is how do you respond, or how would you respond if your child brings home someone of a different ethnicity, right? And in what regard? So, is it with regard to friendship? How do you respond? And for a lot of people, that's not, at least in this day and age, it seems like they're totally okay with that. Right now, it may depend on the type of person.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
exactly.
If you bring someone of a different ethnicity that perhaps is from the other side of the tracks, so to speak, you might be like, whoa, what's this person doing here? You know what I'm saying? What are they going to do? And then, like, how do you respond when it comes to dating?
Yeah.
And then how do you respond if it's like, hey, I want to marry this person?
I will say that was probably one of the major areas where I saw racism still existed, was when I would see friends of mine who would marry into white families, right? Friends of mine who were not white. And they would talk to me and they'd be like, dude, they would ask me questions like, why is my wife and her family like this? And I would be learning, because they would explain to me like how their families were. And as close as I was to a lot of my friends, I don't think we were having the conversations that I have now as an older gentleman. You know, we were just living and being friends, and I was accepting things. But like you said, there was a more communal vibe. There was less individualism. And some of the things that I would hear from my friends is like, man, such so-and-so's family, like, they're just so cold-blooded towards each other. And as I'd talk and I'd get them to talk more about it, I would realize and I would pick up on things. I was like, wow. So these were things that were values in this person's particular community, that once they married into that family, they realized real quick, like, okay, that's how you are, but that's not how this family is.
Yep.
And it was automatically assumed that he was wrong. Automatically assumed that he was wrong. The family wasn't trying to learn. The family wasn't trying to grow and hear that perspective. It was like, hey, you should feel fortunate to have married into this family. And if you'll listen to us, we'll show you how to be, we'll show you how to be like us.
Yep.
It's not like, hey, show us how to be like you.
Yeah, hey, let's learn from you.
Yeah.
Let's understand who you are.
Yeah.
Not
and I'm sure you've
conform.
experienced some things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I've definitely experienced some of those things. And I've been fortunate enough to talk about them and work through them.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm a pretty opinionated person who,
really?
Who does this research and thinks about this stuff. And so when I'm having these conversations, I'm pretty forthcoming about them, but that isn't. And think about it, like, it's been my whole life. So you just get to a point where you get tired and you roll over.
That's true.
And you just say, you know what, this is what it is, and I'm just going to enjoy my life as best as I possibly can with the limitations that I have. You know what I'm saying? And everybody does that, and to some degree, with the things that they have in their lives at some capacity, but this is just a particular thing that I have to carry. You know what I'm saying?
For sure. And to be fair, to the families in that situation, I don't know that a lot of it is based on superiority in their mind, but it's definitely rooted in fear.
Yeah.
And we've got to move from fear into empathy.
Yep.
Right? We've got to move out of that space, and we've got to begin to say, okay, where is this person coming from, and how can I learn? How can I grow? I think that's a really, really important, because we're all the same at the end of the day, right? I mean, we're humans. There's one race, the human race.
Yep. Definitely, I agree. 10,000%, man. We got to move into that space where we're understanding, learning from each other, and not seeing. There's things in our society that we've been told are the ultimate things, and so those are the ultimate, because we think those are the ultimate things. That's the standard by which we judge each other by. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so those things are separating us.
Like
money,
wealth.
power,
Yeah.
right? Individualism,
Beauty.
beauty,
Physical
what
fitness.
it means to be beautiful, what it means to be physically fit, right? All those things are kind of, and how we perceive them are shaping and defining how we interact with each other. And it's like taking the time to recognize that stuff and like removing intentionally that stuff from our perspectives.
Yeah.
And I think when we do that, that's when we start to see the change, you know what I'm saying, and the interaction that we need to see in order to see some of these issues dealt with. And
like what we have in common.
Racism being one of them, right?
Right.
And so obviously as we wrap up today with Christian perspective, like we always do, as I think about this issue, you hit the nail on the head, right? The reality is there's only one race, the human race.
Right.
That race is social construct, right? At least in the terms of white and black. It was something that we created to define people. Human Genome Project, right? We're 99.9% the same. 0.1% is the deviations that we see among all humans, right?
Wow.
And if we hearken to the Bible, Genesis, right? We see that God creates man in his own image, right?
Yeah.
The Imago Dei. And because of that, we all have inherent dignity, value, and worth.
Imago Dei is Latin for image of God.
Yep. And so because of that, right, we all have an intrinsic value that's been given to us by our Creator, and nobody or nothing can take that away. So nothing that's happened in your life can take that away. Nothing you've done and nothing that's been done to you can take that away, right? That's been given by God, and it can't be removed. Now, it may have some dirt on it, right? It may be a little... You know, I like to think of like a wine glass when I think about it. It may have got distorted or whatever in the dishwasher, but it still is what it is. You know what I'm saying? And then when
that's so good. When you look at people that way, if you really see like, man, this person belongs to God.
Yeah.
They're a child of God. They're made in God's image.
And that's really how I try and think about people, especially when in my mind I want to objectify a woman, or if I want to, you know, dehumanize a person or put down their perspective, like, yo, this person is made in the image of God. Like, they have inherent dignity, value, and worth, and I should treat them as if they do.
I remember, it makes me think of this passage in the Bible I read once, and maybe you remember the particular reference, but Jesus is talking and he's like, you know, whatever you've done unto the least of these, you've done unto me, you know? And so how we treat each other who are considered to be in a vulnerable or less powerful situation. Like Jesus takes that stuff personally, man. And I remember that just hit me when I first became a Christian, just thinking about it matters how I treat people. That's one of the things that just made me love Jesus. Like he would say stuff like that and I'd be like, wow, I need to be a better dude. You know what I mean?
Definitely. And I think it comes down to, okay, and we can take this macro with anything. The things that I've been given in life and the things that this world gives me, how can I use them to benefit other people? So if I am rich and white, how can I use my richness? You know what I'm saying? How can I use the power that I have as a white person in the space that I'm in?
That's powerful, dude.
To help other people. The same if you're black and rich. The same if you're Latino and rich, right? And if you're poor and black, poor and white, poor and Latino. We all still have gifts. We still have possessions. We still have... And how can I use that to benefit the people around me? How can I use that to
not to benefit myself,
exactly, to influence in the world in a way that would make it ultimately... It would make it a better place, but ultimately, right? For us as Christians, the goal is to build the kingdom of God, right? To make this place look more the way that God intended it to be in the beginning, right? Where people are loving for, caring for each other, not sinning against each other in the way that we are. And I think we see at the end, Revelation 7:9, right? That so at the end of the Bible, as it talks about how things, what Christians believe is going to happen, that God is going to have a people for himself that are from every tribe and every nation and every tongue, right? So it's not contingent upon, well, only Americans,
right?
Or only this, or only
a
that.
specific kind of Christian,
specific kind of people,
right?
Or this specific color. No, everybody, right?
Right.
And ultimately, what are we looking for in this world? We're looking for something to unify us, and we've been unable to find it. I think because the only person that can unify us is God, is Jesus. And so, yeah.
So good, man.
All right. So episode 10 in the books.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate you guys listening, following us on social, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, RLTKPHX. Yeah, I got it that time.
Yeah.
Right. Drop us a comment. This was the
audio's on iTunes.
Yeah, it'll be on all the podcast platforms. Mm-hmm. I know that this is like one of those heavy, difficult conversations, so we'd love to continue this dialogue with you guys.
Feedback, give us
feedback, give us questions. Like, this is something that we can continue to talk about. We can go live about.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And answer questions, or we can have a Q&A on it, or whatever else. So let us know, man. Like, we're doing this to begin the conversation. This shouldn't be where it ends. This should be where it begins.
Right, that's good.
Right, and so we want to just start to help you think about this stuff and help you think about, as you influence Gen Z, whether it be a parent, a coach, a teacher, if you're a Gen Z or yourself, right? How can you begin to influence the people around you in a way that's going to bring about the social change that we all want to see? And for us, ultimately, we believe that that social change is going to come through Christ. So anyways, hope you guys have enjoyed today. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.